The widow pitied her broke groom. He bought every ranch north of the Rio Grande. The preacher read the whole service with a kind of careful gentleness, the way you talk to a man who's standing at the edge of something he can't see. I noticed it. Clara noticed it too, though she kept her eyes fixed on the window the whole time, the one that looked out over her dead husband's fields, because they were still her dead husband's fields in her mind. The ring I put on her finger had belonged to my mother. It wasn't much to look at. I saw Clara glance at it once and then look away, the way a good woman does when she doesn't want to say the wrong thing. It was April, cold still up on the high flats. The cottonwoods hadn't done much yet. There was a minister, Clara's cousin Bess, Bess's husband Lyle, and a boy who worked the Dunmore place who'd wandered in because nobody told him not to. That was my wedding. I didn't mind. I want to be clear about that. I was 43 years old and I hadn't expected a wedding at all. Clara Dunmore was 38 and practical in the way only women who have buried a husband get practical. She knew what a man's hands looked like when they'd worked, and she knew what they looked like when they hadn't, and she'd made her own calculations about me before she said yes. What she'd calculated was, decent man, not much money, good for the place, better than a loan. I knew that was the calculation. She didn't hide it and I didn't ask her to. She wasn't wrong either, about the money part. I had $17 when I married her. $17 and a horse named Creed who was already 15 years old and knew it. What she didn't know, what nobody knew, was the $42,000 sitting in a bank in Santa Fe under a name I'd used for 11 years. I should back up. I always do this. Clara used to say I told stories the way a creek runs. I'd get going and then I'd cut sideways and you'd look up and wonder how we'd gotten here. So let me back up. My name is Emmett Cord. I was born in the hill country, youngest of 4, and by the time I was 22 the other 3 were dead and my father's land had gone to settle a debt I hadn't run up. That teaches you something. It teaches you that the fastest way to lose what you love is to let anyone know you have it. I spent 7 years moving. Ranch work, fence work, a year driving cattle up from the Picos for a man named Alvaro who paid fair and didn't ask questions. I saved money the way some men drink, steady, private, a little at a time, and not because I was planning for anything specific, just because the having of it made the not having of it something I'd done on purpose instead of something that'd been done to me. I bought my first piece of land in 1871. 40 acres of hard caliche on the west side of the Jornada, paid for in cash by a man calling himself R. Alcott, which was my mother's name before she married. The deed went into a box. Then I went back to being Emmett Cord, ranch hand, broke, quiet, and of no particular interest to anyone. The second piece was 60 acres 2 years later, then 110. I didn't improve them much. I let them sit. Land up here doesn't go bad. You just have to be patient enough to let other men get scared and sell. The thing about the Jornada, and the country north toward the Rio Grande, all that broken mesa country, is that it looked like nothing for a long time. Men with money looked at it and saw rock and bad grass and not enough water. Men who'd been there 20 years looked at it and saw the same thing, because they were tired and the country had beaten them enough times they'd stopped looking. I wasn't tired, I just looked slow. By the time I rode into the Dunmore place that February to ask about fence work, I had 11 separate parcels. Some I held outright, some through Alcott, 2 through a third name I won't mention here because the business is still settled. 370 acres total, all of it north of the highway from Albuquerque, most of it straddling the best water in the territory. Hector Dunmore had owned the Dunmore place for 20 years and he was 2 years dead. His widow was keeping it by herself, and by God she was keeping it. But the winter had been hard and the hay was short, and one of the wells had started going alkaline. I showed up in February. I was honest about what I could do. I could fix fence and I could pull a pump and I could read the land better than most. I didn't mention the reading the land part directly. I just mentioned the fence and the pump. Clara hired me. She watched me work for 3 weeks before she said anything beyond the necessary. She wasn't cold, she was conserving. She'd learned to be careful with herself, same as I'd learned to be careful with my money. What made her decide, I think, was the day I found the second alkaline seep on her north section. I didn't tell her what it meant right away. I just went out there on my own time, on a Sunday, and dug down 3 feet and then came and found her in the kitchen and showed her the sample and told her where it was and where it was heading and what it would do to her grass by summer if we didn't trench it off. She stood there with the dirt in her hand and she looked at me for a long time. Not the way a woman looks at a man she's deciding about, just the way a person looks at something they're trying to understand. "You didn't have to do that on a Sunday," she said. "I know," I said. "I was up anyway." She made coffee. We sat at her kitchen table and I showed her on a rough sketch where the water was moving. Her kitchen had a low ceiling and the smell of wood smoke and rendered fat and something sweet. She'd been putting up dried apple. The table had a groove worn in one side from 20 years of Hector's coffee cup going down in the same spot every morning. I thought about Hector Dunmore a lot those weeks, not in a jealous way. He'd clearly been a decent man and a steady one, and he'd loved this woman well enough that she was still wearing the shape of him. That groove in the table, the way she kept his coat on the peg by the door even though it was too big for her and she'd never wear it. I respected that. A woman who loved her dead husband good was the same kind of woman who'd love the next man good, if she ever got around to it. She got around to it in March. She didn't dress it up. She came to where I was working on the south fence and she stood there until I put down the tool, and then she said the Dunmore place needed more than she could give it alone, and she knew I wasn't a man with money, but she thought I was a man with sense, and she was tired of being alone with all of it. She said it plain, like a business arrangement, which I suppose it was, except her voice changed on the word alone. Just slightly, just enough. I said yes. I said it like a business arrangement too, except for how long I stood there looking at her before I said it. The wedding was April 7th. The preacher's careful gentleness. The ring that wasn't much. Clara's cousin Bess making a meal afterward that was genuinely good, pork and dried beans and biscuits and a pie from the last of the apple. I ate more than I had at any meal in years. I don't know why I remember that. The food, and the way the light came in sideways through the kitchen window while we ate, and how Clara sat across from me and kept her face composed the way she always did, and how her hand was on the table near my hand, and neither of us moved. That night after Bess and Lyle and the Dunmore boy had gone and the preacher had ridden south, we sat by the fire. Clara had a piece of mending in her lap, but she wasn't mending. She was watching the fire. "I want to say something," she said, "and I want you to understand I'm not trying to insult you." I waited. "I know you don't have much," she said. "I mean money, and I want you to know that's not what she stopped, tried again. I didn't marry you because I thought you could fix everything. I married you because I thought you were," another stop. Clara didn't often do this. She was a woman who said things cleanly. "I thought you were someone worth knowing, that's all." She went back to looking at the fire. I could see the side of her face and the way the firelight moved on it, and I thought about all the things I could say. "I appreciate that," I said, which was all I said. But I held it, what she said. I held it the way I'd held things my whole life, private, in a place where it couldn't get taken. The first month was the Dunmore place's work, which was considerable. I pulled the alkaline pump entirely and redirected the water through a ditch I cut on the North 40 that took the seep off toward the arroyo where it couldn't hurt anything. I rerailed the south fence. I fixed the hinge on the barn door that had been working against itself for a year. You could see it in the wear pattern, the way the wood had been torqued by a hinge put in wrong. Clara had been fighting that door every day for God knows how long. She watched me work, not suspicious, curious, the way she'd look at the dirt sample, trying to understand. One evening she came out while I was checking the second well, which was the good one, and she had 2 cups of coffee, and she sat on the fence rail and drank hers and handed me mine, and after a while she said, "Where did you learn all this?" "Ranch work," I said, 20 years of it. "You're better at this than Hector was," she said, not meanly, just as a fact. Hector was good with cattle. He wasn't much with the land. I didn't say anything to that. "I mean it as a compliment," she said. "I know you do," I said. The coffee was good, strong. She made it the way I liked it without me ever having told her, which I noticed, because those are the things you notice. 6 weeks and I rode to Santa Fe. I told Clara I had some business. She didn't ask what kind. That was one of the things about her. She understood that a man's business was a man's business until he made it otherwise. She handed me a list of things she needed from the dry goods and sent me off with no more ceremony than that. I was gone 4 days. I settled 2 matters through the Alcott name, a parcel northeast of Clara's land that had gone to tax sale in February, and a survey I'd been waiting on for a section further north that abutted a water right I'd held for 3 years. The survey came back good. That section had the best grass I'd seen in the territory and a spring-fed tank that never went dry. I bought the parcel and confirmed the water right and paid a lawyer named Gutierrez to regularize the paperwork. And then I went to the dry goods and got Clara's list and a few things she hadn't put on it and rode home. She was in the kitchen when I came in. She looked at the extra things, a good knife she'd been making do without, a tin of the tea she'd mentioned once in passing, and she looked at me and something moved across her face that I couldn't entirely read. "I had a little more money than I let on," I said. "A little," she said, flat, not angry, just filing it away. The dry goods were no trouble. "The knife," she said, "how did you know about the knife?" "I watched you work around the old one for 6 weeks. She turned back to the stove, but her back was different. Something in it had shifted. That night she came and stood by where I was sitting on the porch, and she put her hand on my shoulder and kept it there a moment without saying anything. Then she went back inside. That was the whole of it. That was enough. In August, a man named Prieto came to the ranch. He was a land agent out of Albuquerque, young, well-dressed, the kind of man who thinks clean hands are evidence of intelligence. He was looking to put together a land package for a group of investors back east, and he'd gotten a list of the parcels in the area, and he was working through it. Clara brought him out to where I was. She didn't know why he'd come. I watched his face when he saw me, work clothes, grease on my forearms from the pump I'd been pulling, a crease in my hat that had been there so long it was part of the hat now. He had me sized up in about 4 seconds. He explained what he was doing. A consortium, looking at ranch land north of the highway, willing to pay good prices. "What kind of prices?" I said. He mentioned a number. It was about 60% of what the land was worth. "That's generous," I said. "We think so," he said. He was talking to a point about 6 inches to the left of my face, which was how he'd been talking to me since he got there. "Who do you have so far?" I asked. He had 5 parcels. He named them. I knew every one. I turned down offers on 3 of them when they'd come up, and the other 2 I'd been watching for 2 years. He didn't have any of the good land. He had the edge land, the hard-use land, the land that looked like something from the road. I told him I'd have to think about it. He said he was at the Albuquerque hotel until Thursday. He gave me a card with the hotel on it. He shook my hand like a man who's already discounted what your handshake means. Clara walked him back to his horse. I watched from by the barn. I saw him say something to her, and I saw her turn and look back at me with an expression I hadn't seen on her face before. After he rode out, she came back, and she stood in front of me. "He told me he thought you seemed like a straightforward man," she said, "and that he hoped I'd encourage you to sell." "He said this like he was doing you a favor," she said, "like I'd be able to talk some sense into you." Yes. She was looking at me the way she'd looked at me over the dirt sample the first time. Emmett, she said, what are you not telling me? I looked at her for a long time. She held it. Quite a bit, I said. I told her that night, all of it. The parcels, the names, the 42,000 in Santa Fe, the first piece of caliche on the Jornada and how I'd paid for it. The years of it, the patience and the quiet and the deliberate appearing to be nothing. I told it straight, not to make it sound smart. Clara sat across the table and her face moved through several things while I talked, and then it settled. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How much land?" Counting what I confirmed in Santa Fe, about 420 acres, most of it north of the highway, some of it touching your northern fence. She took that in. That parcel, she said. The one north of the highway with the spring tank. Yes. I've been watching that parcel for 2 years, she said. Hector wanted it before he died. We didn't have the money. I know, I said. That's partly why I bought it. She looked at me. I had a feeling I'd be back this way, I said. She was quiet a long time. The fire had gotten low. I could hear the wind coming off the flats, the particular sound it made through the gap in the barn boards, like breathing almost. I'd gotten used to that sound. You let me think you had nothing, she said, not accusing, thinking it through. I've let everyone think that for 20 years, I said. It wasn't aimed at you specifically. It's just how I operate. Because of your family, she said. I looked at her. She hadn't had that information, or I thought she hadn't. Bess's husband Lyle, she said. He's from the hill country. He told me your father's land story 2 years ago. I didn't know it was you until just now. I sat with that. So you knew I'd been through something like it, I said. I knew you understood land, she said. I knew you were careful with things that mattered. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine. Her hand was brown from the sun, and the knuckles were scarred from 2 years of running the place alone, and it was without question the most honest hand I'd ever had touch mine. You could have told me, she said, gently, not a rebuke, just the truth. I know, I said. I wasn't ready. Are you now? I turned my hand over under hers and held it. Yes, I said. Prieto came back Thursday with a revised offer. He must have done some more research because the number was better. Still not right, but better. He stood in my yard with his clean hands and his Albuquerque suit, and he gave me his best pitch. I told him I wasn't selling. He asked why not. I said because I'm buying. He blinked. Pardon. I'm buying. The Estrada parcel, the 2 Wicks pieces, and the section with the alkali flat that your consortium has already picked up. I'll give them a better price than you did. He looked at me for a while. Then he looked past me at the house, where Clara was standing in the doorway. Who are you? He said. Emmett Cord, I said. I own 420 acres north of the highway, and I'm going to own about 200 more before winter. He left without shaking my hand. Clara was laughing when I came in. It was the first time I'd heard her laugh, a real one, not the polite kind. She was leaning against the doorframe with her arms crossed and her eyes bright, and she was laughing. His face, she said. Yes. He thought you were. She couldn't finish it, still laughing. I know what he thought. She settled. She looked at me. Emmett, she said, and her voice had the thing in it that I'd heard just once before on the word alone. I want you to know something. I waited. I didn't pity you, she said. I mean, I did a little. When you showed up with that ring. She touched her finger where the ring was, my mother's ring. But it wasn't the main thing. It wasn't even close to the main thing. What was the main thing? She uncrossed her arms and came toward me and put both hands flat on my chest. Not soft, just placed, present. You saw my land, she said. The real trouble with it. You went out on your own Sunday and you dug down and found what nobody else had found in 20 years, and you came and showed me. Like it mattered, like the land mattered. She paused. Like I mattered. I put my hands over hers. They were warm from the sun. You did, I said. You do. She stayed there a moment with her forehead against my jaw, and I could feel her breath and the warmth of her through my shirt, and the whole afternoon light was coming through the open door behind her, long and gold off the flats, and I just stood in it. I held her hands against my chest. Neither of us spoke. Outside the Dunmore place, our place sat in that light. The fence I'd fixed. The barn door that swung true now. The North 40 with the seep trenched off and the grass coming back in good and green. Everything I'd built in 20 years of quiet was finally in one place, and that place had a name on the deed, and the name was mine. We bought the Estrada parcel in October, the 2 Wicks pieces in November. The alkali section the consortium had tried to flip. Prieto's investors took a loss, and we didn't lose sleep over it. By the following spring, we had north of 600 acres. Clara ran the cattle side. I ran the land. We didn't step on each other. We'd both lived alone long enough to know how to share space without crowding it, and that's a rarer thing than people think. Rarer than love, maybe, or maybe it's a part of love that doesn't get named. In the evenings I'd come in and she'd have the coffee on, and I'd sit where Hector's cup had worn the groove in the table, and I'd put my cup down in that groove, in his place, and I didn't feel strange about it. He'd loved this woman well, and she'd loved him back, and there was no shame in inheriting a good man's table. She'd sit across from me, and sometimes she'd talk, and sometimes she wouldn't, and either way was all right. One evening in April, a year after the wedding, she was looking at me across the table with that particular look she had sometimes, like she was still adding things up. "What?" I said. "Nothing," she said, "just thinking. About how I told Bess you seemed like a decent man who didn't have much money." She smiled. "Not the laughing kind, the quiet kind. Bess said I was probably right on both counts." "You were right on one," I said. "The decent man part," she said. "Yes." She put her hand on the table. I put mine over it. Outside the window the last light was going off the flats, that particular color it goes in April, not red, not gold exactly, something in between that doesn't have a name. The cottonwoods were coming in. The grass on the North 40 was the best I'd ever seen it. We just sat there in it. The man nobody'd looked at twice, and the woman who'd started looking. That was enough. That was more than enough.